as you heard, we could have perhaps had him in person if we'd done this a month earlier. So
Yeah.
where in Chicago are you located now?
Libertyville, northwestern suburbs. And I'm not from the suburbs of Chicago. After 20 years in Champaign, we just moved up here, so it's all new for us.
Uh-huh. Okay. So he is the lead research software engineer at NCSA. So his group addresses many projects, with the goal of improving the software development processes. Now, I think it would be good if NCSA would publish something on good practices in software engineering. There was a course that used to be taught here, but I understand from my research programmer that we hired who got his degree here, he looked at me and go, "Oh, I've never seen that course. It's not given anymore."
Yeah,
But we learned from John Stone that there are really good and bad practices, but people just need to be told what they are with some more up-to-date examples that resonate with the people,
yeah,
right? It can't be back on Fortran, for
yeah,
example.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I'll mention just real quick. So Dan Katz is kind of throwing around that idea, and we have about 40 now research software engineers at NCSA who specialize in this kind of work. We're more than happy to come over and talk to you guys about that particular aspect.
Uh-huh.
So yeah.
Come
Uh,
over, mean. Do we have to come to Chicago or do you
no, I,
literally?
like I said, there's many of us, and I'm happy to come down. It's just this week I had to travel for something else, and so I wanted to come down this Friday, but I couldn't make it, unfortunately.
Okay, so some of the areas he's touched on, which will affect people, and there's research in the STC, is not only the data management, but machine learning, image-based retrieval. I know Ito was very concerned about are his beautiful images being stored properly and can he see them quickly when he wants?
Yeah.
Also, there are a lot involved in this computational biomedical research and just in general high performance computing. So what I asked actually Kenton to talk about before you got it passed on is what exactly is Clowder and how can we think about using it to manage our data, particularly when we have different data types. It could be anywhere from images to simulations to code. And so just in general, maybe call it metadata. And so you got your degree in mathematics and computer science from the University of Illinois, I guess before they changed their name to
Yes.
computer and data sciences.
A
So
long time ago.
yeah, so without any further ado, Luigi, can you please enlighten us about Clowder?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And like I said, thank you so much for allowing me to present online. I'm very passionate about this work. This is not the only work I do and I've done at NCSA, but it's definitely one of the ones that I spend the most time on. So just to make sure we use the time we have the best way possible, time check. How much time would you like me to take? Right now it's 2:54. I can stay longer. Just want to make sure I don't, run out of time.
I'll ask the audience. I mean, it normally goes to three, but we ran over, started a little late. So I'd say at least 15, 20 minutes, and I'll
Okay.
stay longer to hear about it. But
Okay, appreciate it. All
uh,
right, so yeah, I want to take it at heart. If I see people leave the room, go for it. But yeah, I'll also move through the slides pretty quickly, kind of to give you a broad stroke overview of what this is, and then maybe questions we can kind of drill down, and you'll have the slides as well. So yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned like different file types, different data types, metadata. That's exactly what Clowder was, kind of built to do. And this is work that we started more than 10 years ago. I'll tell you a little bit about the history later on. We won't spend too much time on it. But if you don't know what a Clowder is, it's actually like a cluster of cats. So we have all these jokes about cats. It's also because it was one of the first projects that we did that was very much cloud native. This doesn't just mean AWS and other kind of commercial clouds, but also on-premises cloud like Radiant, like JD mentioned. Just kind of that approach on how you develop software and deploy it to these kind of environments. And so the first kind of joke here is the long tail of data. I'm sure you've heard this in other places. But again, when we started this work, there was the kind of the tugging of the rope in two directions. There was the big data pool, right? And you want like I have a lot of data, right? How do I scale? And also the kind of long tail, which was this idea that every lab does its own thing, develop its own algorithms, its own pipelines, its own data formats. And so how do we create something that works kind of for both? And for us, that was really important because, in the 20 plus years I've been at NCSA, I've worked on a lot of different projects. And every time we come to the table, we come to the table to help the researchers kind of solve their problems by developing new software. And so we kept kind of building the same software, right, for data management or trying to fulfill the same requirements. So what we did was we tried to say, okay, across projects, how can we make software, right, that is flexible enough to support multiple domains with as little work as possible, right? Customization as possible. So this is actually an older slide that I think it's 5 years old by now. So that list is not accurate, but the goal here is to just give you a sense of the breadth of the kind of projects that we have worked on over the years. Also the breadth of funding sources. So obviously a lot of it is NSF. We have some NIH project we've done this under, but also private sector partners, with the University of Illinois. Okay, sorry. Okay, so what is Clowder in a nutshell, right? It's not a central service. It's something that you'll deploy or we can deploy for you on some of the resources that JD described. It's all open source, so you actually don't need to come to us. You can go to GitHub and you can take it and deploy it and try it out and maintain it on your own resources. We've done a lot of work to make it as easy as possible to deploy on these different backends. So while at NCSA, we run a lot of the instances on Radiant. In general, we have run instances on AWS for companies. We have run instances at other universities. Others have run instances at other universities. So you can think of something that you can set up an instance for your own center that is just for your center, right? So you can manage users, data sets just for your center. So what is Clowder in a nutshell? There's 4 main areas that we always talk about: sharing, metadata, analytics, and visualization. I'll tell you a little bit about each one of them. When you go to Clowder, right, it's a web-based system. So you have a web interface. A lot of the questions were, how do I get access to my data? How do I share it with others? Obviously, the web is one method. We also have an extensive web API, so you can write a lot of script against the system. But, if you go to Clowder, and this is V1, you'll see something like this, where, if you are used to Zenodo and other of these systems, kind of should look familiar. And so you create data sets, you upload files. The system can create previews, and you can share with people and give access only to certain people. Maybe it's private, only a few people can access it. Maybe the whole world on the internet can access it, right? So there's that aspect of sharing with others, both locally on campus as well as, with the rest of the world. And we do have a new version of it that I'll tell you a little bit about it at the end, but these are screenshots for this new version that we've been developing. It's in beta right now. One of the things that we're doing here is also supporting DOIs. JD mentioned that. We know that that's one of the first needs that people have in terms of these systems. So the nice thing about this, again, is that not only you get a DOI, but it's data that you have local already. You don't have to move it somewhere else. And also these ideas of like improvements based on the feedback that we've gotten over the years. So for example, versioning your data set is one of the things that kept coming up. Metadata is the second thing I've mentioned. And again, I'll move quickly so that we have time for questions. But one of the unique things about Clowder is that we leave, the way you define metadata is very well supported within the system and very generic. So for example, on the left, you'll see in this particular case, one of our collaborators at Illinois is putting some information about a data set, funding institution, missing data, principal investigator, grant number. These are kind of like more like, research level metadata about the project. But there's also this missing data field. On the right, you see something that is a little bit more technical. So in this case, right, we do a lot of geospatial data. So in this case, we have what we call an information extractor automatically extract bounding box from a geotiff that was uploaded to the system, right? And behind the scenes, this information, I'll show you in a second, is stored in a very portable, machine-readable format. But at the same time, we also provide this web interface to kind of do this so that the user can do that on their own. And the way you define these fields over here is fairly complex and sophisticated, and it's done through these forms within the system. So what that means is that you don't just get to the system and say, okay, I have only these fields that people can fill out. You actually get into the system and say, okay, these are the fields I want people to fill out, right? Some are requirements, some are not, some are this type. And so you create that standard vocabulary, you create those fields you want people to, fill out. And that means that the quality of the metadata, right, is supported right away as you're creating the data, not like as an afterthought. Oh, now I have to publish it, and I have to think about these things, right? Also, you can imagine as you do this, probably in files, right? Next to the raw file, you might have a text file. This is a little bit more supported, within the system. This is a representation behind the scenes of how we represent this kind of information. You can look it up, but it's called JSON linked data. It's part of the semantic web technology kind of area of research and application. Schema.org, if you're familiar with it, it's something that uses the same format. We can talk more about it, but the important thing here to understand is that it's portable and it's well defined. And it's searchable. So within the system, you can come here and search, the description of the data set, but you can also come here and say, oh, I want all the data sets and the files that have ODM variable name equal temperature, right? And so you can see how, as you're working with the data, you're accumulating it. Now you have this nice data space, right, that you can use to discover new data potentially. And it's still within the boundaries of your research groups, right, of your institution, depending on how you deploy the system. The third aspect is this information extraction aspect, right? So, you talked about simulation, computational, and also in general about data curation, right? So you get this data within a system, right? Or you have it on disk, right, on Taiga, and now you want to run code on it, and maybe you're using Delta. And a lot of that work usually is done command line, right? We're all used to do that command line. But we have interfaces and way to take your code and you can deploy it as these Docker containers. We can talk more about containers if you want, but the idea here is that as you develop these data pipelines, these tools, you have ways to embed them within the system. So the next person or your fellow researcher can actually have access to them to a web GUI, right? Or an API endpoint. They don't have to figure out how to install the requirements. They're already there. And the kind of things that we do with this are a lot. Like I have some examples here of type of things we do. Visualization preprocessing, high performance computing submission, object identification in an image, for example. I imagine that's very common with your center. And also the other aspect of this is that you can actually set up how this gets triggered automatically. So you can say when a new file of a certain type gets uploaded or metadata gets added manually by user, run this tool. But if you want, you can also run it manually, right? And so here's an example of this picture taken outside of NCSA, gets uploaded to a Clowder instance, and all of a sudden there's this metadata that gets defined that says, oh, I found some text in it, here's the OCR for it, you can search on it. There's some human preference extractor that says, how much green there is in this picture. There's something that identifies faces, there's something that identifies eyes, but we only have the location in the image, right? So you can see how the kind of things that you can do are varied, and that really depends on your system, right? On the extractors you deploy within it. User-driven, these are some UI, kind of interfaces within Clowder in this new version that we have. Okay, data visualization is the fourth type. And so in this case, we have a lot of different ways of visualizing the data. And so if you look at this, what you'll see is that you'll see on the top left 3D objects, you'll see people being identified, geospatial in the middle, you'll see cells in an image, you'll see file types visualized in a certain way. You'll see a document here and a machine learning algorithm identified certain sentences that were relevant to this use case we'll talk about next. You'll see a histogram over a comma delimited file, right? And so on. You can write these and you can deploy them within your instance of Clowder. So again, that's the long tail of data, right? this idea that you have your own tools and you want to deploy them. Last thing is how you access all of this. So we have written a lot of different clients for Clouders in the past, including Jupyter Notebooks. You can use that and Python library to access it. But we also written some, custom clients, and you can do that too. All right, and that's kind of an overview, a very high-level overview of what the system does. So let's take a look quickly at some use cases to give you more specifics of how have we used this system over the years. So here's one. This is a NSF-funded critical zone network CINet observatory, where the researchers here get a lot of data from the field, but they also do simulations. They also upload their own data manually. And I like to show the slide because I like to show two aspects of how the data comes in. So one is manual upload. Somebody does something, creates, has some files they've created in some way, and they just upload them manually. Or it gets uploaded automatically, right? And we'll see an example of this in a second in the case of microscopes in the lab. So for example, we can see here as the FTP transfers, some data loggers directly from the field, some photos that somebody took in the field. And so all of these get into these instance of Clowder, and they're all now in one place, right? And you can access them together at the same time. Apologies. All right. So TerraRef is another one where we had, somebody, JD mentioned Globus, right? And that's a way to get data from outside UIUC, right, into, UIUC systems, and vice versa, data within UIUC to somewhere else, right? And so in this particular case, what we did was we had a pipeline where from Arizona, data would be streamed petabytes every night. It would be streamed to NCSA, and then we would index that data into a Clowder instance, and then that data was available to researchers through this web interface. We would also run a lot of pre-processing algorithms on this hyperspectral images. It was basically a gantry over a field that was taking pictures of these plants growing every day. Permafrost Discovery Gateway is another one. This is one that it was NSF funded, now is Google.org funded. And as you can see, we have remote sensing data. JD mentioned NASA. A lot of this is from NASA, but it's also from private satellite companies. And, basically we're trying to figure out at the Panarctic level, the researchers are trying to figure out how coastal erosion happens, toe slumps, lake changes. This is at the Panarctic level. So we have to use systems like Delta AI, right? But we don't want every researcher to have to log on to Delta AI, right? We want them to come to a website and visualize data through that. We want them to, put these algorithms in place, these systems, and then new data becomes available, and then they can come to this Clowder interface. They can download it directly from, their instance of Clowder. We're doing some research work with IBM. So if you are doing a lot with machine learning workloads, there's a lot of not just training, but also fine tuning. And so we're developing ways to use Clowder as the platform to do this kind of work. On campus, we have a collaborator. We have an NIH project where they're building this NLP system and model. And in this case, Clowder is just behind the scenes. What you do is you build your own front end, and we use Clowder behind the scene to launch the model, kind of store all the data, and then over here, you can see the results. We have something with the Department of Transportation, which again, it's important because the front end is completely custom, but behind the scenes, they use Clowder to manage the workflows and the data. I'll skip a couple because I want to make sure there's time for questions. You guys might have been involved in the Spore Seed NSF project that ended a couple of years ago. Clara Nashted was the lead PI of that one. But that was all about microscopy image extractors, and they did a lot with edge computing. So they had these clients next to the microscopes that would upload to Clowder, provide all the metadata, and then the users would use the Clowder interface, the researchers, to actually get access, right, and share this metadata with everybody else on campus. We also have somebody at the University of Queensland who's doing something very, very similar. and they're managing their own instance for this, and they're using Clowder on their own. But it's a similar kind of use case where you have the instrument, you're creating some data, and now you want to share it. You want to do further, elaboration of the data, and so on. And then last thing I wanted to mention, we're really excited because we have this new version of it. And one of the things that we're really excited about is that in the past, when people wanted to change the core of the system, they had a hard time with the technologies that we had. So one of the things that we did with this new version is it's all in Python and some plain JavaScript and React. So what that means is that if you wanted to actually change the core of the system, as long as you can know these technologies, which are very ubiquitous nowadays, you can actually do that as well, and you can contribute to that. So we're pretty excited about that and other things. But I'll stop there, and hopefully there's questions. Thank you.
Yeah, Luigi, I saw in the very last slide you had give feedback through Slack. I have to say, I'm not a great fan of Slack. Is there other way to give feedback?
Yeah, you can definitely email me directly. Yeah, and I'll be happy to point you to the right person or answer your questions myself. Yeah, yeah. That's more for anybody out there who maybe doesn't know us. They can also jump on Slack.
Yeah, so somehow I'm having in my mind, and I'll let the others visitors here ask, connecting, how do I use Clowder and all this information about data storage I just heard about from JD? Like, I was, I'm happy to have a place I can put the data, and then maybe I can use Clowder to decide who has access to it, it's a public, a group, or whatever. So are you planning on these being used together somehow?
Yeah,
Cloud?
we have plenty of instances of Clowder running on NCSA using the same resources that JD discussed and showed. So we set up instances of Clowder for groups, and they just use those behind the scenes, right? So we do that work with you, and Illinois Computes is a great way to maybe prototype that. So if you want, we can put in a request to Illinois Computes, just like you would ask for space on Taiga. You can actually ask and say, hey, I have this use case, I want to try out Clowder, and then we'll request that space on Taiga as part of that, and we'll set up that Clowder instance together. So that's one way. We're working on a service agreement that makes it easier for others. So usually in the past, we basically submitted grants together, right, with researchers to kind of work together and have this Clowder instance. But we're looking at ways in which researchers who already have grants can actually just kind of pay to have a Clowder instance. But again, because you guys are on campus and we're all colleagues, I think the easiest way is Illinois Computes on the short term.
Mm-hmm. And you say pay. So what's the cost of this?
With Illinois Computes, it's free.
Okay.
Yep.
So any other questions? Please just raise your hands, or anybody have something? I think we've surpassed our time, but it was good that we know who to contact besides Kenton. And oh, that's my parking saying it's over too. So I think I have to go. But thank you very much, Luigi.
Thank you.